It is Friday, March 20th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another Crimson episode of LTPS. As per usual, let's begin with our PS Plus reminder. The monthly March games are still live on PSN. Make sure you add those to your library. Also, PS Plus Extra and Premium's March lineup is now live on PSN as well. And we do see for Tekken Dark Resurrection, no trophies. So still continuing the trend with Bandai Namco not paying for that feature for their classic games on PS4, PS5. Still incredibly disappointing, but I digress. Anyway, getting into our first news story, we actually have a number of news stories bunched together for PlayStation firmware updates. So first up is the annual mandatory PS3 firmware. So we do have a new one live on PSN, 4.93 for PS3. This is one of those things where it shows up every year and it becomes alarming, so you might see headlines, but Sony has done this every year because they are updating the Blu-ray keys for the console, which is good that they still do that for PlayStation 3. If anything, it's just more annoying in that if you do play on PS3, chances are you probably run a custom firmware console, so you have to avoid updating to make sure that a stable build is put out and make sure that 4.93 CFW is completely validated. Otherwise, if you're on OFW, you can update as per usual. Nothing too crazy going on there. PlayStation 4 also got a mandatory firmware update, that one being 13.50, and the changelog for PS3 and 4 will always say it's only for improving system performance, but again, probably Blu-ray keys, so PS4, like 3, will be seeing these various annual updates, even though that's the only minor change that they're doing. PlayStation Portal got a very important firmware update, version 7.00. Nothing too crazy for the quality of life stuff, so they improved the product detail page. There's game invites that were adjusted a bit. They now show full trophy notifications when you're streaming a game through cloud streaming, and then they improved the search screen. But the big headline feature is 1080p high quality mode, which is essentially them offering a higher bitrate option. So the max that you can do now is 25 megabits per second, whereas previously it was 15. So that does widen the gap a bit as far as the kind of titles you can reliably play and not see those splotchy artifacts as you're going through the game world, because typically it helps when you're playing a game that is, let's say, very dense with visual noise going on. So you're talking games like FF7 Rebirth or Yote with a lot of foliage, right? And as you're traveling through that game world, it can sometimes not have enough data coming through, and then you get those splotchy artifacts. So having the high bitrate mode, it's not going to reduce your latency, but it is going to help you avoid those streaming artifacts while you're playing those type of games. So that certainly does help. We actually saw in the PlayStation blog too, we had some cool facts that were posted about PS Portal users. So one thing is that for cloud streaming, when they did add that to the portal, that usage jumped 162% year over year, which is one of those funny percentages where they're not telling you exactly how many people were playing, but when you adjust it off of what was probably a low number previously, that's how you get this very impressive percentage jump. And we also learned that 50% of PS Portal owners are subscribed to PS Plus Premium, which is not exactly the most shocking revelation when the kind of users that buy Portal are probably highly engaged PlayStation customers. The other big major firmware from this week is PS5's version 26.02, 13.00, and this one for all PS5 owners has that adjustment to the Welcome Hub where there's now the showcase mode and slideshow, so just a little minor thing there. You also have support for Unicode 17 emojis, but for PS5 Pro users, this is the enhanced PSSR image quality setting, now tucked away in settings, which is basically applying the PSSR2 algorithm for PSSR 1 games if they're not properly patched in, which is massive. So far, we've seen a lot of early results of that toggle being used for games that were problematic on PlayStation 5 Pro, and so we are seeing a massive improvement. Various titles have already been tested. Silent Hill F is pretty much cleaned up, so the PSSR film grain effect is gone. The shimmering in the foliage is gone. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth sees a really clean visual jump with much crisper edges and visual clarity in the foliage. Dragon Age the Veilguard is improved, but that still seems to have a bit of noise, so not every game is going to be completely fixed in that sense. Alan Wake 2 had that 864p upscale to 4K, very aggressive with PSSR in performance mode, and so the game now is much more temporally stable. There's no shimmer effect on the grass, there's no bizarre warble effect on the ground, and generally everything in the game looks much sharper, as PSSR2 is doing for a lot of these games. I personally checked out God of War Ragnarok, Spider-Man Remastered, The Last of Us Part 1, Demon Souls, Ghost of Yotei, they're all noticeably sharper on their performance modes. Some more than others. I mean, Demon Souls was probably the most narrow gap as far as a big jump. The game still had that sort of PSSR 1 film grain effect, but that is, again, mostly cleaned up. So a lot of these games have just seen a massive improvement on the new algorithm with that toggle. And there still is this sort of baked-in patch that developers can do for the new algorithm too. And so we already have caught wind of various titles that will get the PSSR 2 enhancement. In particular, Cyberpunk 2077, which had no PS5 Pro enhancement, that is now getting a patch alongside games like Assassin's Creed Shadows and Control. They are getting specific patches as well. So PlayStation 5 Pro looking much better, a lot more compelling of a sell, and I mean, it's great that the toggle is finally here, especially for all these games that did have some issues, because that first year was hit or miss for various landmark titles that came out throughout 2024 and 25. All right, moving on to one of our big rumors from this past week, which is this new report from Tom Henderson, writing for Insider Gaming, about how Sony is going to be dropping the PSN and PlayStation Network branding. So this is based off an internal email that Insider Gaming has seen, where this was sent out to developers with PlayStation, and Sony is going to be dropping that branding by September 2026, and SIE has said they're going to phase out all their assets by that time, and nothing is going to change as far as the functionality itself. So what we know of as PSN, logging in, messages, all the PSN features, that's not going away. This is purely a unified branding initiative. And so that's what we're hearing. Tom's been pretty well sourced, so we'll see if this does end up taking effect. This does strike me as very, I don't know if it's like weird or odd, but what's the end game here, right? Because we see companies rebrand and change things all the time. Sony had that initiative that they did from 2011 or something to 18, which was the Sony Entertainment Network. And those IDs and that branding wasn't necessarily meant to replace PlayStation Network, but it's one of those things where they do change things often, or they try to rebrand and use different messaging. In the case of PSN, it's been around for such a long time that is also very synonymous with the acronym branding itself, PS1, 2, 3, PSN, like PSN rolls off the tongue. Oddly enough though, it is something where if they got rid of it tomorrow, you wouldn't really know unless you were told, because on PlayStation 5, for example, you very rarely see the PSN branding or name or the icon itself. It is something where it could go away, you wouldn't notice, but we still talk about it as enthusiasts because it just makes sense to talk about the platform in that regard. But it's still, it's very analogous to like when Elon Musk bought Twitter and completely walked away from that branding. It's borderline stupid that you have this name that is so synonymous and well known. It's a cultural icon, and Twitter and tweets ended up in dictionaries. That's like free branding, free press, free advertising, and to have something so recognizable and then walking away from it to call it something else is just, it's dumb, I find. So this is kind of similar. I don't know why they would do it. What makes the most sense to me is that we are in the back half of the PlayStation 5 lifecycle, and we are very close to new hardware, which that does tend to happen. Sony will do some rebranding or changing of the color scheme to better fit a new product lineup. And so something you might have noticed with PlayStation Plus in particular is that they've walked away from the grayscale background and the very bright yellows. Yellow is still in there, but like now it's a dark blue. Right? And that's very deliberate. Like, at least for me, I notice these things and they stand out very clearly. And so this stuck out to me immediately of like, oh, that's where you're going with this, huh? And that might be a color scheme and a key pillar of how they brand and showcase, hardware like PS6 and this new handheld. And you see that sort of transitionary period happen between PS3 to 4 and 4 to 5. And well, again, now we're going to be seeing that probably going to PS6. So I would think that maybe it's simply a matter of just sticking with PS Plus branding, maybe a dark blue color scheme. I don't know if they will give it a new name or not. I mean, conceivably, they don't even have to give it a new name necessarily. But it still strikes me odd that they would walk away from what just is something that really rolls off the tongue quite easily, and that is PSN. Moving on to some PlayStation Studio news with a new trailer for Saros, this one being the features trailer, which showcases the various hardware features of PS5 that this game will take advantage of. And it's the usual suspects: 3D audio, adaptive triggers, haptic feedback, the near instant load speeds to come back after you die. But this is also a lot of new footage of the game as well. And again, it looks so good to me. It is insane. We've got some great clips of the bullet hell action and the shield being used as well, which it seems like the shield is going to play a very big key role in survivability of the moment-to-moment combat. I mean, that's the big thing about Returnal, is that you are constantly dodging, and that will dynamically change a lot of the combat encounters in this game if the shield is something very similar to, I don't know, boosting in Super Stardust, or, well, Super Stardust had a shield, obviously, but you'd pick it up and you could only take one hit, then it goes away. This is sort of a temporary, comes back kind of thing, so it's somewhat analogous to Super Stardust with the boosting, where you'd really use that to sort of get out of a chaotic moment, but it's the same thing here, right? I think you're going to be finding yourself in combat scenarios that require that shield, and so it will be a much different way of playing the game versus Returnal. And that was at least the one thing that stuck out to me in this small amount of footage that was still new from what we've seen previously, but I'm still super excited for this game, and I just love seeing just ever so slightly more about it, and it looks really good. Next up, Death Stranding 2 on the Beach recently launched on PC, and with that came all the extra content that the PS5 version has just been patched for. So if you're playing on PS5, or if you haven't gotten to the game just yet, then you are going to get all the new things added to that PC version, which includes a new difficulty mode called To the Wilder, and also the replayable boss fights, including all the Neil encounters. Then there's also new live-action cutscenes that were originally cut from the game. There's new nightmare sequences for Sam and additional footage. There's the chiral cat. They can appear in Sam's private room. There's also 21:9 ultra-wide support on PlayStation 5, which is insane, and then new items and further gameplay adjustments. So that is available now on PlayStation 5 alongside that PC version, which, you know, funny enough, the PC version recently debuted to a very high player count on Steam, so it peaked at around 55,000 something players, which DS1 had a peak of like 22,000, which was a pretty strong debut for that game back then, but you know, I think it's one of those things that's somewhat ironic that a PS Studios game, not an in-house studio, obviously, it's an external partner with Kojima Productions, but, you know, hearing that Sony might be walking away from the PC launches, and here's one that they're publishing, so this is not 505, and it actually debuts quite strong. Although, reasonably speaking, DS1 did have a better price launching on PC. It did Xbox Play Anywhere. It's been exposed through the Epic Game Store. It was given away for free, so it probably had a better shot of building a long-term audience building up to 2 versus the, you know, other PS Studio games that have done somewhat well, but either the sequels or more recent games have debuted to much lower numbers. But I found that somewhat ironic that we are seeing one of the last PS Studio PC games actually do pretty well. Now, in not-so-good PS VR2 news, we have one of the very few PS Studio games on VR2, Firewall Ultra. That has been delisted, and it's going offline in September. And the way we found out about that was from a nearly 3-year-old blog post from August 2023 about the game coming out, and that's where they updated that article and let people know that, hey, it's shutting down September 17th, 2026, and the game is already gone. So you can't even jump into it if you want to, which is incredibly frustrating. And don't get me wrong, like, the game came out, it didn't do well, the reviews were on the mixed side to poor, if I remember correctly. Like, it had problems, right? But it sold poorly, and that's also very likely a byproduct of VR2 and the VR landscape itself, but that was the reason why First Contact had to shut down, and it was a sad situation all around. So, you know, it makes sense that these games don't pan out, and they have to get sunset. My argument and my problem with this is, why are we not sunsetting them properly? They did the minimum here, which is giving people ample time to play it. It's 6 months. That's the minimum. The longer, the better. But to already remove it completely eliminates any chance of people being able to go in last minute to check it out, archive footage, just for research purposes, going for the platinum. Some people like doing that for games that are going offline. And if you didn't engage with it previously and buy it back then, you're already SOL. The end date means nothing to you unless you were already invested in the game itself. I get there's a problem with selling a product that you know is going to be defunct, but you're the publisher. Why not make it free to play? Like, it's really irritating when that stuff happens. It's completely useless to put out that end date, and there's no way to access the game now. So I'm really bothered by that, and it's a shame that they're treating a PS Studio game like this. You need to properly sunset it and give people, for whatever reason that they want to, the autonomy to engage with it before it really does go away. Moving on to some third-party news with Crimson Desert, where the game is now finally available after a very long development cycle and very ambitious hype and build-up, and the game really trying to sell you a dream of being able to do so many different things. And now we finally have a decent understanding of what the final product is, because reviews are now finally out there. So the game debuted on Metacritic at a 78 across more than 80 different reviews at the time of filming this LTPS anyway. Now some of the key points people have made thus far is that the game can be incredibly fun to explore. It's really worth interacting with and checking out the various systems and mechanics, and they are deep. They don't feel like an afterthought. But there is also some genuine complaints about a story that leaves a little bit to be desired. Some feel like the interactions, the puzzles, and things to do leave you without much guidance, and you're kind of thrown in. The combat can feel great with a lot of things on screen, but then also there's slower paced enemies that are uninteresting with these 1v1 segments. So it sounds like the game has some high highs and low lows, as I've seen it described. It really runs the gamut. I mean, this is one of those games that very clearly is not going to resonate with everyone, but that's what's always somewhat not puzzling, but man, like, we just go through this so often with games that debut, and these are not bad reviews even remotely. Like, it's a 78. Generally speaking, it's been considered good across the board. It just means that the game is not landing in this upper echelon of the 90 plus range that some people were hoping or thinking that the game might end up being. But that was what everyone was so cautious about, which I think was completely warranted, and that it's a very bold sales pitch. Look at how big and ambitious this game is in this game world, but you never truly know how compelling that is until you're sitting there playing it yourself. That doesn't make it a bad game. It just might simply mean that you have to give it a shot and see if it's something that you truly click with. And so I would encourage anybody to do that if you are curious about the game yourself. Having said that, we are seeing some initial numbers, and the game is debuting just fine. So it's not like it's going to have a problem finding an audience that really enjoys the game. But man, it's somewhat exhausting every time we do have these games review well, just not exceptionally well. Moving on to some sales data for RE Requiem coming in, which this game is still on its run of being an incredibly successful entry in the franchise. 6 million copies sold, still the fastest selling in the franchise, but we're now hearing that PlayStation 5 was the lead platform for sales for this game generally so far, which kind of gets into that conversation of console relevancy with PC doing as well as it has been doing nowadays, and certainly PlayStation's position in what has been not quite an uncertain environment, but how safe are they really in the next 5-10 years? Well, anyway, based on sales data coming in from Christopher Dring, which he primarily covers Europe, PS5 is around 54% of sales for the game. And then we have Matt Piscatella from Circana, which tracks US video game sales. He chimed in that during February, PS5 was the lead platform. It was below 50% ranked by dollar sales, but it was the lead by a meaningful margin over PC. And just for those that don't know, I mean, they get this data from the publishers, so it is point of sale stuff at retail when games are sold physically, but they also get the numbers from publishers because they share those numbers with these organizations, that being Circana or the GfK, the GSD in Europe. So that's partly why they tend to have very accurate information. It's not simply retail point of sale. They get these numbers, and it's cited in every report, or even the screenshots that Matt will share, for example. This is data being shared from the publishers. That's how they don't have to get the numbers from Steam. They get them from Capcom themselves. Having said that, that does give us a decent picture of how well this game did in particular. And PS5's always had a decent share for a lot of third-party games, obviously, and it does run the gamut, right? It depends on the particular game and franchise, because Monster Hunter is doing really well and getting really big on PC nowadays. So Capcom has famously said 50% of their revenue and their back catalog games are coming from PC nowadays. PC as a platform has been doing really well, but you know, the console relevance for PlayStation, I find they're in a weird gray area of there are still so many other external factors and big players in the business that will certainly change and shift their model in what I would consider more long-term. I think in the short to mid-term, Sony's in a very strong, comfortable position, especially when you have your closest competitor previously sort of soft dropping out of the race. Because if we expect the next Xbox Project Helix is going to be a low-volume, expensive machine, that gives Sony a more clear runway to sell a high-volume machine that's very performant over the other competitor in the space, which is Nintendo with the Switch 2. And Sony will be directly addressing that marketplace as well with their own handheld. So conceivably, I would think in the short to midterm, they're actually very well positioned. And that's how you have games like Requiem still selling very strongly on the platform. And I would think that's going to be a running theme for other high-profile third-party games. Next up, after rumor after rumor after rumor, and the initial Bethesda acquisition, and the constant debates about if this game will or will not come to PlayStation, seeing it come out underwhelming to many people, and we know that Microsoft did make a deliberate decision to not make this game for PlayStation 5 until their more recent U-turn. Anyway, the whole recap being over, the game is confirmed. Starfield is coming to PlayStation 5 April 7th. Here are the details for this game. It's going to be $50 for the base version or $70 for the premium edition, which is going to include the 2 expansions, the previous Shattered Space and the new Terrain Armada, which was announced alongside the free update. So the game is going to support PS5 Pro, that's confirmed, with a Pro Performance mode, and it's also going to target a higher FPS. Then there's the Pro Visual mode, targeting a higher resolution. They're not saying any exact numbers right now, but the Armada DLC, that is going to include a new quest line. And then the Free Lanes update, that is for the base game, so everybody will get that. And that's going to add new locations, X-Tech, enemy modifiers, a new land vehicle, etc. There's actually a lot going on there. The Armada DLC is the more transformative experience for the game. That's going to make a number of changes and new content for players to jump into. But we do have, speaking with IGN about the PS5 version, we have Bethesda's Todd Howard saying, quote, "We've always wanted to do it. I would say that we have a great relationship with PlayStation. We've been there for a long time with our games, so I think this was one we knew it would be a matter of time. We've been working on it for a while, so we still maintained a close relationship. We're still shipping a lot on PlayStation. People forget with Fallout 76 and its other updates in Skyrim, we still have been doing a lot of PlayStation work, even though Starfield wasn't there, so we're just excited to get it out there to the audience." I think that's him still just saying what he can say in the moment. We actually saw from the acquisition and the FTC emails, I think it was, either that or the CMA, we got so much tea from behind the scenes with Microsoft and their various acquisitions, but we knew from emails that Bethesda was actually, somewhat upset that their games would not be going to PlayStation post-acquisition and that their audience would be narrowed down to PC and Xbox. But that's neither here nor there, because we know that the company took a U-turn as far as their overall direction and now shipping on PlayStation. So with that said, Starfield is finally coming over. It is fascinating that this game, it really has built this reputation of, it did not deliver even remotely what people were thinking or hoping it would be, or at least what Bethesda was hoping it would be, which is the sort of, the big new IP, here's our new RPG, and it did not even get close to the same cultural impact that Skyrim had. So it does have not the best reputation surrounding it, but if you're still into sci-fi games, RPGs, it's very similar, if anything, to Crimson Desert. There's some friction. You might not click with it, but others do click with it. So it might be something worth checking out if this is a game and franchise that's more up your lane. Now, technically speaking, this is not a direct PlayStation news story, but we would be remiss not mentioning what has been one of the biggest stories in 2026 so far, and a massive controversy, because this past week we have NVIDIA announcing DLSS 5, which is a massive far cry from what was previously a deep learning super sampling technique. So DLSS 5 has seen a lot of pushback for what it's doing to the lighting and character faces in these games in this initial reveal video. So we saw that publishers like Bethesda, Capcom, NetEase, Tencent, Ubisoft, WB Games, they all signed off on it, and some of their games were included in that reveal video. We have the founder and CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang. They called this the GPT moment of graphics, blending handcrafted rendering with generative AI, and the intended goal is enhanced lighting beyond what path tracing can accomplish. But the underlying geometry, we're told the game is not being changed. So it is the same geometry, the same texture assets, and in the fallout of all the huge pushback, widespread pushback from the community, fans, developers, and artists themselves, on-the-ground people making these games, because, spoiler alert, even though publishers have signed off on the game, that could very easily be senior management and not the people that made these assets. So with that said, after all that stuff came out, we did see that Tom's Hardware managed to speak with Jensen Huang, and they gave some bold words on the matter so far, saying, quote, "Well, first off, they're completely wrong," referring to people that have an issue with this. Quote, "The reason for that is because, as I have explained very carefully, DLSS 5 fuses controllability of the geometry and textures and everything about the game with generative AI." He then went on to explain that developers can fine-tune the Gen AI to match their intentions, and that it does not change the artistic control. Which, that's all well and good, but it seems very apparent to me that they revealed this under the assumption that what they are showing off is good, and this is intended. Therefore, the artistic control angle is like, okay, well, you sort of revealed this thinking that this is what we should be working towards, and that's what the end result should be. And that is deeply problematic, because I think the pushback so far has been absolutely warranted. It does look just incredibly off and weird, and I mean, for so many reasons. It's definitely an ethical and moral issue, because, like I just mentioned, sure, these publishers signed off on it, but there are on-the-ground people that very likely were not involved in approving this. The artists and modelers that put these things together, and also there's a case to be made for the models themselves that lended their talent to the game and did motion capture, or even just giving their facial capture to the game. And so you have these weird overcorrections with the faces in particular. Like, that is definitely the biggest problem here. And I mean, to remind people, like, the reason why it's doing this, because it is the same geometry. You know, that much is true. It is the same geometry, the same textures, but this model is working with very limited information. It's injecting way too many assumptions on what these things are supposed to look like. And so not having deeper access to that information of the game is really what compromises it. That's how Grace Ashcroft looks like some Instagram model, or the Hogwarts Legacy Pro Tag, who's supposed to be like, I don't know, what, 15 years old? He's supposed to be a young kid, and then he ages up like 20-something years. Like, it's a deep overcorrection of how these characters are supposed to look, because that's what this thing is attempting to do. The face models are definitely a massive issue. It is still primarily meant to be a lighting fix, and that too actually does have problems, because with baked-in lighting and screen space reflections, and a lot of these handcrafted tools that developers have historically done for decades now at this point, that is still very deliberate placement of where things should be casting a shadow, where more light should be coming in through something, right? And so this is still doing a lot of guesswork on certain spaces and how they should look, and it's really getting it wrong. It's very much a Gen AI looking high contrast overcorrection of all these different scenes and faces, and it just looks gross and awful, and I hate it. I can't stand it. I can't believe they showed this off thinking it looks good. And don't get me wrong, some people that are really enthusiasts and bullish about this kind of technology, they do like it, and that's all well and good, but I think it's a very reasonable thing to say that this was not it, and it presents a number of moral and ethical problems for how you're trying to apply this technology to the overwhelming majority of games. Now, obviously, it should go without saying, this is for NVIDIA GPUs. It's not directly a PlayStation story again, and I believe that what they're saying as far as, like, you can fine-tune it, we will have tools, but I'm curious if NVIDIA is starting to really understand better that they should take this back to the drawing board, and for the next presentation, and also how they better communicate the options and tools that are available to developers, that, okay, this was not what we were trying to accomplish here, even though the initial reveal video basically tells, I think, where they were coming from, and they thought this was going to be their big GPT landmark moment. It undeniably does look a lot different, but I don't think it went in the direction they were expecting, and I sincerely hope this pushback, which was warranted 100%, makes them greatly consider what they're attempting to do to our games of tomorrow. Now, in other similar AI news, we have some words here from the Take-Two CEO, Strauss Zelnick, speaking with Christopher Dring of the Game Business Show. And during a recent conversation, he talked about his strong stance on AI and what the technology can and cannot do. He said, quote, "There's already plenty of technology out there that allow people to create video games, and as a result, thousands of video games are created every year. And yet the hits all cluster among the large entertainment companies, almost entirely. and now and then an indie, which is generally speaking well-funded and pretty robust in and of itself. The notion that somehow new tools would allow an individual to push a button and generate a hit and bring it to many millions of consumers around the world, it's a laughable notion. I'll tell you, Strauss Zelnick is a fascinating businessman to listen to. He's very intelligent, and I think he does articulate his points very well, because he's bullish in the sense that for many, I think people understand AI does have a place in our environment. Even if you are vehemently against it, you know it's not going away. So it's more a matter of how do we navigate it and make it genuinely useful to our daily lives. In the case of what he's talking about, just to contextualize what is more of a larger conversation that we can't quote the entire thing, obviously, but I encourage you to listen to it. He does talk about how, yeah, we can use it. It's going to be great. It can really get rid of sort of the mundane tasks, and we can use it, but it's simply not going to make the mega hits that something like a Grand Theft Auto 6 is known for, or what is going to be known for, right? So I don't know, it's there's much more context in place of the conversation, but I do always value somebody that can articulate their points well, even if you don't agree with it. It's something that he feels strongly about, and it's very consistent messaging with how he feels for how the technology can be used, and he still stands by that it's going to be humans that are going to be the ones making hit entertainment products. Moving on to perhaps one of our last updates for Highguard, where the developer Wildlight Entertainment is probably shut down. Nothing official just yet, but we're seeing that the LinkedIn was removed. The co-founder put on their LinkedIn that they're not at the studio anymore, website's gone. Refunds are being sent out for people that spent any money on the game on PSN. So if you bought anything on there, you should be getting a refund, or you already got refunded. And so we're just seeing that very likely the studio is gone, as in they're not going to try to do something else. And it's as everybody has said before, I mean, they made something that people tried and didn't like. That's all well and good. It was just more a matter of, will they try to do something again? No. So it's kind of a shame, because it's, they're still a competent studio. They're still talented people that can try to make something else, but we can see that usually in today's environment, you kind of have to land something right away to find money for the next thing, because your name and notoriety and your previous product, if you can't find something right off the bat, chances are you're just going to have to dissolve and move on. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X. And if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it is so simple. Follow the link down below or scan the QR code and enter the Gleam giveaway. And supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week, because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and we had a number of things going on. We had some coverage on the PS5 Pro update with PSSR 2. We talked about the PS Portal's new high bitrate update, and also we had a conversation about the state of physical games in 2026, which so far ain't looking too good. There was also a big thing with Crimson Desert, because that game basically needs online for the disc, which is not unusual in today's landscape, but that's what we had going on. Next week we'll be doing Click R3, probably another upload as per usual, and that is pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.